The black limo came down Bellad Avenue slow, the way a hearse comes, and it stopped crossways in front of the diner so nothing could get past it. Two wheels rode up onto the curb. The chrome caught the grey morning light and threw it back hard enough to make the cook squint through the window. Inside, behind the counter, a woman in a faded apron stood with a coffee pot still in her hand. And her name badge said Esther, and she had no idea that the car blocking her door had come for her. It was the last morning she ever meant to work there. She had given her notice 11 days before. Her hands had stopped shaking about it somewhere around day 4, and now she just felt tired, the bone-deep tired of a person who has carried a thing as far as she can carry it. The bell over the door had not rung yet that day. The grill was cold, and out front, idling against the curb like a held breath, sat $60,000 of automobile that did not belong on this street and had never once belonged on this street in all the years she had worked it. He set the pot down. She watched the back door of the car, the one nearest the diner, and she waited for it to open. To understand the limo, you have to go back 5 years, to a $2 cup of coffee and an old man who could not pay for it. Esther Mabry had worked at the Bellad Street diner for 9 years by then, but it was the 5th year that mattered, because that was the year the old man started coming in. He came in on a Monday, the way new habits start on Mondays, and he sat at the third stool from the end where the vinyl was split and taped, and he ordered a coffee and nothing else. When she brought the check, he turned his coat pockets out, slow and embarrassed, and he found 80 cents and a button and a folded bus transfer. The coffee was $2.25. He started to get up. He started to say he was sorry, that he would come back, that he had made a mistake about the day his check came. She had heard that exact apology 100 times in 9 years from people who never came back, and she had learned to say the cold thing that the manager wanted her to say. She did not say it. She told him to sit down. She told him the coffee was on her, and before he could refuse, she pressed 2 singles and a quarter from her own apron into the register and marked the cup paid, and she filled his cup again to the brim, so he would have a reason to stay in the warm a while longer. He looked up at her when she did it, and there was something in his face she did not have a word for, then a kind of startled attention, as though no one had done a small thing for him in a long time, and he had forgotten that small things existed. He asked her why she would do that. She told him it was just a cup of coffee. He told her quietly that it was $2.25 and that he had watched her count out her tips at the end of the morning and knew what 25 cents was to her. She wiped the counter in front of him and said that a man who could read a tip jar that closed had been poor once himself, and he did not answer that, and the not answering told her she was right. Outside it had started to rain, the cold, thin rain of late autumn that gets into a person's bones, and she watched him watch it through the window, and she understood, without being told, that he had nowhere in particular to be and nowhere warm to go back to. So she left the pot near his elbow and went on with her shift, and every time his cup dropped below, half she came back and filled it, and she did not bring another check, and when he finally rose to go, he stood by the door a moment, as if he meant to say something large, and then he only said, "Thank you," and went out into the rain in his thin grey coat. His name was Lonnie. That was all he gave her at first, just Lonnie, and a hand that had a tremor in it when he lifted the cup. He wore the same grey coat every day, frayed at both cuffs, with a missing top button he never replaced. His shoes were good shoes, once the kind with real leather soles, but the leather had gone soft and pale at the toes. He was the sort of man the world had decided to stop looking at. Esther looked at him. She paid for his coffee the next day too, and the day after. It became a thing she did without deciding to do it, the way she breathed, the way she wiped the counter in the same long sweep every shift. $2.25, 5 days a week, and on the days he came in on the weekend, then 2. She never let him see the math of it. When he tried to leave a nickel or a dime on the counter, she would already be wiping it into her palm and saying she would put it toward tomorrow, and there was never a tomorrow he had to pay for, and they both knew it, and neither of them said it. What she did not know in all those years was who she was pouring coffee for. Lonnie Pryor was not a poor man. He had been once, a long time ago, a boy who shined shoes outside a bus depot and slept 4 to a room. But that was 60 years gone. The man on the third stool, the man with 80 cents and a button, was worth more money than every soul on Bellad Avenue put together would earn in 10 lifetimes, and he had come into the diner that first Monday, not because he was broke, but because he was broken in the way grief breaks a person, and he had walked until his legs gave out, and the first warm door he found was hers. His wife had died that spring. 41 years they had been married, and then a Tuesday in April she was gone, and the big house out past the ridge went silent in a way that scared him. He could not stand the quiet of all that money, so he started walking. He would put on the old grey coat from his shoe-shining days, the one he had kept for 60 years to remind himself where he came from, and he would empty his pockets of everything but a little change and ride the bus into the part of the city where nobody knew his name, and he would sit somewhere warm and watch ordinary people be kind or be cruel. Because he had reached the age where that was the only thing left he wanted to know about a place. Whether the people in it were kind. He found his answer on the third stool of the Bellad Street diner in a woman who paid $2.25 she could not spare for a stranger who could not pay. He never told her. That was the thing about Lonnie. He had spent his whole life being seen for his money, courted for it, lied to for it, and he had learned that you cannot find out what a person truly is once they know what you have. So he kept the grey coat and the empty pockets and the tremor in his hand, and he let Esther go on, thinking she was the one taking care of him, because in every way that the heart counts, she was. Now, you should know what those 5 years cost her, because they cost her plenty. Esther was raising her granddaughter alone. The girl's name was Mabel, 6 years old when this story turns, with 2 front teeth missing and a laugh too big for her body. Mabel's mother, Esther's daughter, had gone off somewhere 2 years back and stopped calling, and Esther did not speak of it much because there are wounds you do not press on. So it was the 2 of them in a 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a walk-up, with a window that looked out on a parking lot, and a radiator that knocked all winter, and a rent that went up every single year, while Esther's pay did not. She made good tips on a good day and thin tips on a slow one. She had not bought herself a new pair of shoes in 3 years. She skipped lunch most shifts and called it watching her figure when the cook teased her about it, and the cook, a heavy-set woman named Ruth, with a gold tooth and a laugh you could hear from the kitchen, knew it was a lie and pretended she did not. Ruth slipped Esther a wrapped plate of whatever was going to spoil more nights than not, and Esther took it home and split it with Mabel and called it leftovers. And still, in the middle of all of that, every single morning, Esther paid for an old man's coffee. There was a night the radiator finally died for good in February, and the apartment got cold enough that she could see her own breath in the kitchen. Mabel had come out of the bedroom in her socks, with a blanket dragging behind her, and asked why the air was cold inside the house, and Esther had knelt down and pulled the blanket up around the girl's shoulders and told her they were going to have a camp out, the 2 of them, right there in the front room where the oven could keep them warm. She turned the oven on and opened its door and pulled the 2 kitchen chairs close to it, and she made cocoa from a packet on the stovetop, and Mabel thought it was the best night of her life. And that was the whole trick of it, that the child never knew anything was wrong. When Mabel was asleep at last, bundled in Esther's own winter coat on the cushions of the couch, Esther sat in the dark by the open oven and did arithmetic. The radiator repair was $200. She did not have. The rent was due in 9 days. There was $41 in the coffee can on top of the refrigerator, and a week and a half of shifts between her and the first of the month. She added it and subtracted it and added it again the way you do when you are hoping the numbers will be kinder the 3rd time, and they were not kinder the 3rd time. And in the morning, she got up with the cold still in her joints, and she rode the bus down to Bellad Avenue, and she paid for an old man's coffee out of that same $41, and she never once thought of doing otherwise. She did not pay Lonnie's coffee out of plenty, she paid it out of nothing. That was the whole shape of the woman. She gave from the bottom of the cup, not the top. The diner itself was held together with tape and prayer. It belonged in those years to a man named Hollis, who had owned it 40 years and let Esther run the floor like it was hers, because, in truth, it was. But Hollis was old too and tired, and one grey autumn his heart gave a warning that scared his children, and they told him it was time. He sold the building. He sold it to a company, the kind of company that buys a city block at a time and has an office in a tower 40 floors up, and the woman who came to look the place over arrived in heels that had never touched a floor like that one. Her name was Dana Whitfield. She came in on a Thursday with a tablet under her arm and a handbag worth more than Esther's car, and she walked the length of the counter without sitting down, and she looked at the split vinyl and the tape stools and the old man on the third one nursing his coffee, and she did a small thing with her mouth that was not quite a smile. She had plans for the building. The diner was not in them. She told Esther this the way you tell a child a pet has gone to live on a farm, gently and without meaning a word of the gentleness. The lease would not be renewed. The kitchen would come out. There would be a coffee place there in 8 months, the kind with one name lowercase on the window and $4 drinks. And there was, she said, no place in that plan for a sit-down diner that lost money on $2 coffee. She stopped at the third stall, where Lonnie sat over his coffee, and she looked at him for a moment too long. The way you look at a stain on a tablecloth at a nice dinner, deciding whether to mention it. Then she turned to Esther and asked in a voice pitched to carry how many of the morning customers actually ordered food, and how many of them just sat. Esther understood the question under the question. She said that some of them just sat, and that some of them did not have anywhere else warm to sit, and that she did not see the harm in a warm seat and a refill on a cold morning. Dana Whitfield gave a small laugh, not unkind exactly, just untouched, and said that warm seats were not a business model. Esther asked her quietly what would happen to the regulars, the men who came in every morning because it was the only warm room they had. Dana Whitfield looked again at the old man on the third stool, at his frayed cuffs and his missing button and his 80 cents counted out on the counter, and she said a thing that Esther would remember for a long time. She said the new place would not really be for that kind of customer. Then she tapped something into her tablet, satisfied, and asked Esther whether the kitchen exhaust was original to the building, as though the old man were not sitting 4 feet away, as though he could not hear, as though a person you have decided not to serve has also stopped being a person who can listen. Esther did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She finished pouring the coffee in her hand, and she said, "All right," and she went back to work, and that was the moment, though she did not announce it, that she decided to give her notice. She would not stand behind that counter and watch them throw the warm room away. She would find work somewhere else, somewhere they would let her keep being who she was. She had 11 days of shifts left on the schedule, and she meant to work every one of them right, and then she would walk out the door and not look back. What she did not know on that Thursday was that the old man on the third stool had heard every word. Lonnie Pryor sat very still over his coffee while the woman in the heels talked about the kind of customer the new place would be for. He did not say anything. He had spent a lifetime in rooms where people decided the worth of other people, and he had learned that the ones doing the deciding rarely changed their minds when you argued, but they changed them very fast when the ground moved under them. So he finished his coffee and he let Esther refill it, and he watched her press her own quarters into the register one more time, and he went home to the big quiet house and made 2 telephone calls. The first call was to a man who had managed Lonnie's affairs for 30 years, a careful man named Wendell who never asked questions. He was not paid to ask. Lonnie told him to find out who owned the building on Ballard Avenue and who owned the company that owned it and what it would take to buy the whole thing out from under them before any coffee place ever opened its doors. Wendell said it would take a day. It took 2. The second call, Lonnie made to himself in a manner of speaking. He sat in the dark in the house his wife had filled with 41 years of living, and he asked her, the way he still asked her things, whether he had finally found the place she would have wanted him to spend it on. He thought she would have liked Esther. He thought she would have liked the little girl with the missing teeth who sometimes came in after school and did her homework in the back booth while her grandmother worked. He decided he was right, and he slept that night for the first time in a long time. The 11 days went by. They were good days, and they were hard days. The regulars heard the diner was closing, and they came in more, not less, the way people gather close to a thing they are losing. A retired bus driver named Cyrus, who had nursed the same coffee in the second booth for years, started leaving bigger tips than he could afford, a 5 and then a 10, folded under his saucer where he thought she would not notice, and Esther started quietly slipping them back into his coat pocket on the hook by the door when he was not looking. And they had a slow, gentle war about it that neither of them ever spoke of, and both of them knew the other was fighting. Ruth took it hardest. She had cooked in that kitchen for 19 years, longer than Esther had worked the floor. And she did not know how to be anywhere else. Esther found her twice in the walk-in cooler with the door pulled shut, sitting on an upturned milk crate with her apron pressed to her face, and both times Ruth came out red-eyed and loud, and dared anyone to say a single word about it, and both times Esther said nothing, and only handed her a fresh towel and went back to the floor. One slow afternoon, Ruth set a plate of meatloaf down in front of Esther and stood over her until she ate it, and said, "You have fed everybody in this city but yourself for 9 years, and today I am feeding you, and sit down." So Esther sat down and ate it, and it was the first hot lunch she had eaten at that counter in longer than she could remember. Mabel asked her grandmother one night over the cocoa why the diner had to close. Esther, who did not lie to the child, set down her own cup and thought about how to say a true thing simply. She told Mabel that sometimes the people with the money decide a place is not worth what it is worth, and that when that happens, you can't always stop them, but you can always refuse to become them. You can be the kind of person who knows better. Mabel asked if the old man with the shaky hands would have somewhere warm to go, and Esther looked at her granddaughter for a long moment because the child had asked the only question that actually mattered, and she said she did not know, and that she had been worrying about that very thing, and Mabel said they should save him a seat anyway, just in case. And Esther kissed the top of her head and did not trust her own voice to answer. Lonnie kept coming in. Same stool, same coffee, same 80 cents. He made a show of not having. But Esther noticed in those last days that the tremor in his hand seemed lighter, and that he watched the door now the way a man watches for someone he is expecting, and she could not have told you why, and she did not ask. She had her own door to walk out of. On the 10th day, something small happened that she would only understand later. A younger man came into the diner she had never seen before, in a good coat, and he did not order anything. He stood near the register and looked the place over the way Dana Whitfield had looked it over, but slower and kinder, and he made a few notes in a small book. When Esther asked if she could help him, he smiled and said he was just looking, and he left a 20 on the counter for a coffee he never drank, and he was gone before she could give it back. She thought he might be another buyer. She put the 20 in the tip jar to split with Ruth and forgot about him. She should not have forgotten about him. He was Wendell's man, and he was counting something, and what he was counting was not the seats. Then came the last day. She woke before the alarm, the way you do on a morning you have been dreading. She made Mabel breakfast and walked her to the corner where the school bus came, and she held the girl's hand a beat longer than usual, and Mabel, who could feel her grandmother's moods the way small children can, asked if she was sad. Esther said she was a little sad. But that being sad about leaving a place meant the place had been worth something, and that was not the worst thing to feel. Then she put on her apron one last time and rode the bus down to Ballard Avenue and let herself in with the key she would have to give back. At the end of the shift the morning started ordinary. Ruth fired up the grill. Cyrus came in and took his booth. A few regulars filtered through, quieter than usual the way a room gets quiet when everyone knows it is the last of something. Esther poured coffee and took orders and wiped the long counter in the same long sweep she had wiped it 10,000 times, and she let herself feel each of those small things one more time. The hiss of the grill, the smell of it, the weight of the pot in her hand. Lonnie did not come in at his usual hour. That was the first odd thing. He was always there by 7. 7 came and went, and the third stool sat empty with its split-tape seat, and Esther found herself watching the door for him the way he had been watching it for days, and a small worry started up in her that she could not name. She told herself he had simply slept in. She told herself an old man was allowed to sleep in. She refilled coffees and did not quite believe herself. It was a little after 9, with the breakfast rush thinning out, when Ruth looked up from the grill and went still, and said, in a strange flat voice, "Esther." And Esther turned, and through the long front window she saw the black limo coming down Bellard Avenue slow, way a hearse comes, and stopping crossways in front of the diner so that nothing could get past it, 2 wheels up on the curb, the chrome throwing the grey light back hard. The diner went silent. Cyrus put down his cup. Ruth wiped her hands on her apron and did not seem to know she was doing it. Esther stood behind the counter with the pot still in her hand and watched the back door of the car, the one nearest the diner, and waited for it to open. And the worry in her chest had grown into something with a heartbeat of its own. The door opened. A man got out. For one cold second Esther did not know him, because the grey coat was gone. He wore a dark suit that fit him the way good suits fit, and his pale soft-toed shoes had been replaced by black ones, polished to a shine. The driver in a cap had come around to hold the door for him. But then he straightened up and turned toward the window, and she saw the face. The same lined, kind face. She had poured coffee for 1,000 mornings, and the same tremor in the hand that reached up to settle the lapel, and she understood that it was Lonnie. It was Lonnie, and it had always been Lonnie, and she did not understand anything else at all. He came in through the door, and the bell rang over his head the way it had rung every morning for 5 years. He stopped, just inside it. He looked at her across the diner, across the split stools and the taped vinyl and all those mornings, and his eyes were wet, and he said the only thing there was to say. He said, "I owe you for a great deal of coffee." Esther set the pot down because her own hand had begun to shake. She said his name. She said, "Lonnie, what is this?" And her voice did the broken thing a voice does when the heart gets to it first. He crossed the floor slow, the way he always crossed it, and he took the third stool, his stool, and he asked her if she would pour him one more cup the way she always had. So she did. Her hands were not steady, but she poured it to the brim, and she did not reach for the register, because some habits the heart will not let you break, even when the whole world has turned over. And she started to press her own quarters in one last time, and he put his hand gently over hers and stopped her. He told her then, he told her all of it, in plain words, the way she deserved to hear it. He told her his wife had died, and he had walked until he found a warm door, and the warm door had been hers. He told her he had let her think he was a poor man, because it was the only way he had ever found to learn what a person truly was. He told her that in 5 years of watching the world be careless with people, he had watched one woman who had nothing give from the bottom of her cup every single morning to a man she believed had less. He told her he knew about the radiator. She had never said a word of it to him, not once in 5 years, but he had noticed a winter morning her hands were chapped and stiff around the pot, and the way she had stood a little too long in the warmth of the open kitchen door, and he had asked a careful question or two of the bus driver in the second booth, and he had understood. He told her he had sat there on the coldest morning of that February and watched her count $30-some out of a coffee can in her mind. He could see her doing it, and then pour his cup and wave away his 80 cents, and he said that was the morning he had stopped grieving for himself and started thinking about her, a woman who would warm a stranger while her own child slept in a cold room. He said he had not known until that morning that people like that still walk the earth, and that finding out had given him a reason to keep walking himself. He told her he had not come to pay her back, because there was no paying back a thing like that. He had come, he said, to make sure the world did not take the warm room away from her. Outside, a second car had pulled up behind the limo, a plain dark sedan, and Wendell got out of it with a leather folder under his arm. And behind him came the younger man in the good coat, the one who had counted something on the 10th day and left a 20 he never drank. And there was a third person climbing out of that sedan, in heels that had never touched a floor like this one. And her face, when she saw the limo and saw the old man on the third stool, was a thing Esther would remember, as long as she remembered anything. Dana Whitfield had been summoned, and she did not yet know by whom. She came in fast, the way she did everything, already talking, already smoothing, the morning into something she could manage. She had gotten a call from the building's new ownership, she said brightly, and she wanted to assure everyone that the transition would be handled with the utmost care, and she was so glad to have a chance to meet the new principal in person, and she put out a hand toward the suited old man on the stool, the way she put her hand out toward anyone with money. Lonnie did not take it. He did not do it cruelly. He simply did not take it, and he looked at her, the way she had once looked at the split vinyl, and the taped stools, and the old man with 80 cents, with a small thing at the mouth that was not quite a smile, and he said that he believed they had met. He said she would not remember it because he had been sitting right there on that stool, in a grey coat, on the Thursday she came through to tell this woman that the new place would not be for that kind of customer. The colour went out of Dana Whitfield's face. He let the silence sit a moment because some silences do more work than any speech. Then he told her without heat what had happened in the days since. He had bought the building. He had bought the company that had bought the building, or enough of it to make the difference, and Wendell stepped forward and laid the leather folder open on the counter. On the very counter Esther had wiped 10,000 times, and there it all was in plain paper. The diner was not closing. There would be no lowercase coffee place with $4 drinks. The warm room would stay a warm room. And the woman in the heels, he said, was free to take her tablet and her plans for the building back up the 40 floors she had come down from, because they would not be needed here. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He had spent a lifetime in rooms where the ground moved under people, and he knew exactly how to move it. Dana Whitfield opened her mouth and found nothing in it. She looked at the folder and at Wendell, and at the younger man with the small book, and last of all at Esther, at the waitress. In the faded apron she had spoken past as if she were furniture, and whatever she saw in Esther's face, it was not gloating, because Esther was not the kind of woman who gloats. Esther only looked tired and kind and a little stunned, the way you look when a thing you have braced for has come undone in your favour, and you do not yet trust it. Dana Whitfield gathered her handbag against her side and she left, and the bell rang over her going the way it had rung over the old man's coming, and the diner let out a breath it had been holding for 11 days. But Lonnie was not finished, and this was the part Esther never saw coming, because she had stopped being able to imagine good things coming for her a long time ago. He turned back to her across the counter. He said the diner was hers now, not to run for somebody else. Hers. He had put it in her name, the building and the business both, with Wendell to handle the dull parts of it so she would never have to learn the words in the folder, and a fund set aside to fix the things that needed fixing, the split vinyl and the dead radiator in her apartment, and the shoes she had not replaced in 3 years. He said he had watched her give from the bottom of the cup for 5 years, and he had decided it was time somebody filled it for her, all the way to the brim, the way she had always filled his. Esther did not understand it at first. The words went past her, the way good news goes past. A person who has trained herself for a long time to expect only the other kind. She heard the word hers, and she heard the word fund, and she heard the word radiator, and she kept waiting for the catch in it. The cost, the fine print, because everything in her life had always had a cost and a fine print. She asked him in a small voice what she would have to do. And Lonnie, who understood exactly why she had asked it, leaned forward over his cold coffee and said the gentlest thing she had ever heard a man say. He said, "You have already done it. You did it 5 years ago, and you have been doing it every morning since, and nobody ever told you it counted." Well, he said, it counted. Esther sat down. She had to. She sat right down on the stool behind the counter, the one she used at the end of a long shift when her feet gave out, and she put her hand over her mouth and she cried. The way you cry when you have been strong for so long that strength has become a habit, and somebody finally tells you that you can set it down. Ruth came out from behind the grill with her apron still on and her gold tooth showing because she was crying and grinning at the same time, and Cyrus stood up in his booth and did not seem to know what to do with himself, and the few regulars left in the room clapped, soft and uncertain, the way people clap when they are not sure they are allowed to, but cannot help it. There was a question Esther had to ask when she could speak again, and it was not about the building or the money. She asked Lonnie why. Why her? Out of a whole city of people, why had he sat on her stool for 5 years? And the old man considered it the way he considered everything, with his coffee going cold in front of him, and he said the truest thing he knew. He said that money had never once told him the truth about a person, not in 80 years, because the moment people saw it, they showed him only what they thought he wanted. He said the only way he had ever found to learn what a soul was really made of was to come to it with empty pockets and see whether it was kind anyway. And she had been kind anyway. Every single morning when there was nothing in it for her, when she had less than he was pretending to have, she had been kind anyway. That, he said, was worth more than everything he owned, and everything he owned was a great deal. He came in the next morning, and the morning after that, and the third stool became his stool again, only now he paid for his own coffee, and hers, and Ruth's, and Cyrus's, and anybody's who came through the door cold and short of $1, because he had learned how to do that from her. The grey coat hung in his closet at home where it belonged. Retired at last, its work finished, he did not need it anymore. He had found out what he came to find out. The radiator in the second floor walk-up was fixed within the week, and Mabel slept warm that winter for the first time in 2. Esther bought herself a new pair of shoes, finally, and then felt strange about it, and bought a second pair to give to a woman 2 booths down who was wearing hers through at the toe, because that was the shape of her, and the money did not change it. The diner stayed open. The split vinyl got mended, though Esther kept the third stool exactly as it was, tape seat and all, and would not let anybody touch it. And when people asked her why, she only smiled and said it had a history. Now and then a stranger would come in down on his luck and try to turn out empty pockets at the register, embarrassed, ready to apologize and leave. And Esther would tell him to sit down. She would tell him the coffee was on her. And she would fill the cup to the brim so he would have a reason to stay in the warm a while longer. Because she had learned a long time ago from a man in a grey coat she thought she was saving, that you never know whose life your kindness is holding up. If you have ever given from the bottom of your own cup when there was nothing in it for you and no one watching, I think you already understand this story, and I would be glad to know it. And if a thing like this warmed you tonight, there are other quiet ones like it, waiting. The kind that remember that the world keeps a long memory for kindness, even when people do not. Esther worked the floor of her own diner for many years after that. She grew old behind that counter the way Hollis had grown old behind it, loved and unhurried, with a granddaughter who became a young woman who came in after school and then after work, and finally came in to take the floor herself when Esther's feet gave out for good. And on the last quiet evening of her own working life, when the grill was off and the chairs were up and the warm amber light came through the front window the way it had come through it for 40 years, Esther wiped the long counter one last time in the same long sweep, and she set the pot down on the third stool, the taped one, the one nobody was ever allowed to mend. And she stood a moment in the warmth of the room. She had not let them take away, and she was not tired anymore, and she was not afraid, and the bell over the door was still. And she turned off the light,